Richard Jefferson was an elite athlete who could jump out of the gym, who made so many electrifying dunks over his career it's too endless to count, while also being able to shoot it and defend at a high level for many years over multiple teams, helping see himself become a fan favorite for his great play while also picking up a chip along the way. This is a look back on Richard Jefferson's career. Richard Jefferson would attend Moon Valley High School in West Phoenix, Arizona, where he would blossom into the player he is today, helping Moon Valley High win a state championship his senior year, and where Recruiting Service Consensus Index ratings in 1998 had Richard Jefferson as the 33rd best overall recruit in the entire country, even making the McDonald's All-American game, competing in the dunk contest as well, all the while showing off his elite athleticism. When it came time to decide on where to attend college, the choice was clear for Richard Jefferson from the get-go, and going to Arizona, staying close to home to play for Hall of Fame head coach in Lute Olson. Now, Jefferson would be joining an Arizona team led by two seniors and future NBA players in Jason Terry and AJ Bramlett. Now, Jefferson would find himself starting on a competitive Arizona team while putting up averages of 11.3 points, 4.8 rebounds, and 2.9 assists a night, making the Pac-10 all-freshman team. Now, the Wildcats would go 22-7 this year, getting a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament in a matchup against Oklahoma. Despite Oklahoma being a 13 seed, they would make it a game because of future NBA players play in Eduardo Najera. Now, going late into the game, Najera would hit a basket to put Oklahoma up 1 with time remaining for a shot from Arizona. Now, Arizona would have a great look to win it multiple times, with Jefferson getting a putback chance but missing it, sending the Arizona Wildcats in Jefferson home. Now, Richard Jefferson would only score 2 points in this game. But entering next season, Arizona would look different, adding future NBA talents in Gilbert Arenas, Lauren Woods, and Luke Walton to replace the graduating Terry and Bramlett. Jefferson would play solidly this season, yet would miss some time due to injury and find himself playing a slightly smaller role, where he'd average 11 points, 4.4 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and 1.1 blocks a night. Despite Jefferson missing time, Arizona would improve upon last year, going 27-7, winning the Pac-10 regular season, which in result would help Arizona get a number 1 seed, where they would handle Jackson State in round 1, then getting a matchup against the 8th-seeded Wisconsin in round 2. Now, Wisconsin did not have a true star on the team, with no one averaging more than 12 points per game during the regular season, yet were a really well-rounded team, and despite being heavy underdogs, would upset Arizona with a well-rounded scoring attack, and Arizona would go cold when it mattered most. Now, Richard Jefferson would average 10.5 points over the 2 games while coming off the bench in the Wisconsin game. The following season, during Jefferson's junior year, it would see him and Arizona have a similar role in regular season success. Jefferson would go on to average 11.3 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 2.7 assists on an Arizona team that would go 28-8, getting a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Now, in the tournament, Richard Jefferson would break out onto the national stage. Arizona would win its first 3 games in the tournament by 10 or more points over Eastern Illinois, Butler, and Mississippi, where Arizona would face Illinois in the Elite Eight, who would be a tougher opponent with Corey Bradford and Robert Archibald playing well, but it wasn't enough as Illinois fell up short to Arenas' great play alongside Richard Jefferson. Now, in the Final Four, they would beat a Michigan State-led team by future NBA players in Charlie Bell, Jason Richardson, and Zach Randolph, which many thought would have provided a close contest against Arizona, but didn't. Yet Arizona would smoke them entirely, beating Michigan State 80-61, with Jefferson scoring 17 points in the game, making it into the national championship game to face none other than Duke. Now, Duke was a stacked team this year, led by 5 future NBA players in Jay Williams, Shane Battier, Mike Dunleavy, Carlos Boozer, and Chris Duhon. Now, despite Arizona's best efforts, which saw Jefferson even score 19 points against Duke, just proved to be too much for them, resulting in Duke winning the NCAA championship. Now, Richard Jefferson, for his play in the NCAA tournament, would make the all-tournament team, but mostly importantly would draw the interest of the NBA for his play, improving on the biggest stage when it mattered most, truly showcasing his skills. Richard Jefferson would decide to declare for the NBA draft afterwards, where he would go on to be selected by the New Jersey Nets with the 13th overall pick in the 2001 NBA draft. Now, in New Jersey, Richard would find himself joining a competitive Nets team led by Jason Kidd, Kenyon Martin, Kerry Kittles, and Keith Van Horn. Richard Jefferson would find himself playing the 6-man role his rookie year, where he'd play well, averaging 9.4 points, 3.7 rebounds, and 1.8 assists a night, making an all-rookie team, helping the Nets go 52-30, getting a number 1 seed in the East, where the Nets would play the Pacers in round 1, who were no average 8 seed, being led by all-star caliber players in Reggie Miller, Jermaine O'Neal, Ron Artest, and Brad Miller. The series would go all 5 games, but when it mattered most, the Nets would prevail, getting a second-round matchup against Baron Davis and the Charlotte Hornets. Yet the Nets would make a very quick work of the Hornets in 5 games, setting up an Eastern Conference Finals matchup against the Boston Celtics. The Celtics were led by Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker, and both would play well this entire series, helping the Celtics go up 2-1 before losing 3 straight in this series with lack of help from the supporting cast in the remaining games. And that meant in year 1 for Richard Jefferson, he was off to the NBA Finals, and meeting the Nets in the Finals was none other than Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal leading the Lakers, where the Nets would have zero answers whatsoever for Shaquille O'Neal, seeing the Lakers sweep the Nets, winning the NBA championship. Now over the postseason, Richard Jefferson would average 7 points, 4.6 rebounds, and 1.3 assists. Entering the next season, the Nets would decide to trade Keith Van Horn and Todd McCulloch to the Philadelphia 76ers for Dikembe Mutombo, with the hopes of Mutombo being able to slow down Shaquille O'Neal if they met the Lakers again. Now on top of this, it cleared the way for Richard Jefferson to become a starter this year, who was a better defender and slasher than Van Horn is what they viewed. Now Richard Jefferson would see his numbers improve to 15.5 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists, fitting in perfectly alongside Jason Kidd on the offense, while providing tough athletic defense alongside Kenyon Martin. Now the Nets would go 49-33, getting a 2 seed for the playoffs, where they would face the Bucks, who were led by Gary Payton, who was traded for Ray Allen mid-season in round 1. Alongside Gary Payton, Sam Cassell, and Tim Thomas, the Bucks would make it a series, but eventually would fall in 6 games, creating the what-if scenario had Ray Allen stayed and they have not traded him for Gary Payton. Next round, they would face a similar Celtics team from the year prior, but would handle them rather easily in a sweep, with Antoine Walker struggling more this go-around, making it back to the Eastern Conference Finals. The Nets would meet the Detroit Pistons, led by Ben Wallace, Chauncey Billups, and Richard Hamilton. Yet the Nets would sweep the Pistons as well, with Billups struggling the entire series. Awaiting the Nets in the finals were the San Antonio Spurs, led by Tim Duncan, David Robinson, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili. Now the series would go back and forth for the first 4 games, with them being split 2-2 before the Spurs would take it to another level with big performances from Tim Duncan, resulting in the Spurs winning the NBA championship in 6 games. Now despite another disappointing finish to the end of the season, Richard Jefferson had played a big part in the team's postseason success, averaging 14.1 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 2.4 assists. Now next season, Richard Jefferson would only improve his game in numbers up to 18.5 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 3.8 assists, where he would play a big part this season in helping the Nets stay afloat, while Kidd and Martin would miss games due to injury, helping the Nets go 47-35, getting a 2 seed. Now in round 1, they would sweep the Stephen Marbury-led Knicks rather easily, getting a second-round matchup against the Detroit Pistons. This go-around, though, the Pistons would prove to be more challenging than the year prior, with the addition of Rasheed Wallace mid-season and Tayshaun Prince's ever-improving game. The series would be a closely contested one, but the improved Pistons would go on to beat the Nets in 7 games, despite the Nets and Jefferson's best efforts, and eventually would go on to win the NBA championship this year. Now Richard Jefferson would average 19.8 points, 6.3 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 1.3 steals this postseason. Now in the offseason, Jefferson would decide to represent Team USA at the 2004 Olympics, where unfortunately Team USA would go on to struggle and get upset by Argentina, only bringing home the bronze medal this season, to the shock of most, where Jefferson would average 6.8 points, 2.8 rebounds, 1 assist, while playing 18 minutes a night over the Olympic span. Now the Nets would look very different entering next season, with Kenyon Martin being traded away, but early into the year they would bolster the team back up with another big trade that brought in Vince Carter. Now despite adding Vince Carter, Richard Jefferson would continue to see his numbers improve again next season, up to 22.2 points, 7.3 rebounds, and 4 assists a night. However, he would only play in 33 games after rupturing a ligament in his left wrist when Chauncey Billups undercut him on a layup attempt. With Jefferson missing, the Nets would struggle more this season, going 42-40, barely squeaking into the playoffs as an 8 seed, getting a matchup against the Miami Heat led by Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal. Now, Richard Jefferson would come back from injury this series, but it wasn't enough as the Nets would get swept. Richard would average 15.8 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2.3 assists this series despite coming off an injury. Next year would see a healthy Richard Jefferson back to form, averaging 19.5 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 3.8 assists a night, helping the Nets to a way better record than the year prior when healthy, with a Richard Jefferson going 49-33. The Nets would get a 3 seed in a first-round matchup against the Indiana Pacers. Now, the Pacers were not the same as the matchup a couple years ago, with Reggie Miller retiring and Ron Artest being traded at the beginning of the season for a fresh start after the Malice at the Palace incident. Now, Jermaine O'Neal would keep this series competitive for a bit, but the Nets would eventually prove to be too much and win in 6 games. Now, in round 2 for the Nets, they would face the Miami Heat for the second year in a row. Now, despite Richard Jefferson being fully healthy this go-around, Shaq and Wade still proved to be way too much for them to handle again, with the Heat winning in 5 games this time and eventually going on to win the NBA championship this year. Richard Jefferson for the postseason would average 22.2 points, 4.1 rebounds, and 4.1 assists. Richard Jefferson would continue a strong form into the next season before picking up an ankle injury, unfortunately, to cause him to miss significant time. Now, without Jefferson, the Nets would struggle, but upon his return, he would help make a playoff push and the team would get into the playoffs, going 41-41 as a 6th seed. On the season, Richard Jefferson would see his averages of 16.3 points, 4.4 rebounds, and 2.7 assists, where in round 1, the Nets would face the Toronto Raptors led by Chris Bosh. Yet with a fully healthy Richard Jefferson, the Nets were not a normal 6th seed, causing the Raptors fits, with the Nets advancing in 6 games. Now in round 2, the Nets would get a matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers led by LeBron James. Now, Richard Jefferson would do his best this entire series to slow down LeBron James on defense, but it ultimately wasn't enough, with the Cavaliers advancing in 6 games. Now, Richard Jefferson would average 19.7 points, 5.6 rebounds, and 2.3 assists a night during the postseason. The next season for the Nets, Jason Kidd would have to miss significant time, causing Jefferson to take on a bigger role, seeing him average 22.6 points, 4.2 rebounds, and 3.1 assists a night, where Jefferson would also pass Kerry Kittles this season as the Nets' second all-time leading scorer at the time. But despite his best efforts, missing Jason Kidd was too much to overcome, with the Nets going 34-48, missing the NBA playoffs. After a disappointing end to the season, the Nets wanted to change things up, and Richard Jefferson would end up being traded by the New Jersey Nets to the Milwaukee Bucks for Yi Jianlian and Bobby Simmons. Jefferson would be joining a Milwaukee Bucks team led by Michael Redd and Andrew Bogut. However, both would spend a significant portion of the year injured, causing Jefferson to be the main man for most of the season, where Richard Jefferson would step into the role, averaging 19.6 points, 4.6 rebounds, and 2.4 assists a night. Now, the Bucks, however, to the surprise, without Redd and Bogut, would miss the playoffs, going 34-48. In the offseason, Richard Jefferson would find himself being traded again by the Milwaukee Bucks to the San Antonio Spurs for Bruce Bowen, Fabricio Oberto, and Kurt Thomas, with the Spurs wanting to complement the trio they had in place of Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili. In a new role backing up the Spurs' Big Three, Richard Jefferson would see his numbers decrease to 12.3 points, 4.4 rebounds, and 2 assists a night, but this was expected. He would go on to help the Spurs go 50-32 this season, getting a 7 seed, where they would face the Mavericks in round 1, who were led by Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Terry, and his former teammate in Jason Kidd. But despite not having the regular season success of the Dallas Mavericks, the Spurs knew how to turn it up when the playoffs came around, and turn it up a notch they did by defeating the Mavericks in 6 games. Now in round 2, they would get a matchup against the Phoenix Suns, led by the duo of Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire. Now, the speed at which the Suns would play proved to provide problems for the Spurs the whole series, resulting in the Spurs getting swept altogether by the Phoenix Suns. Now, during the postseason, Richard Jefferson would average 9.4 points, 5.3 rebounds, and 1.8 assists. Next season would see much of the same role for Richard Jefferson, where he would average 11 points a night, 3.8 rebounds, and 1.3 assists. Now the Spurs would improve upon last season though, however, this year going 61-21, getting the 1 seed, where they would face the Memphis Grizzlies in round 1. Now the Grizzlies would be led by Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, and Tony Allen, and would show to the whole world what grit and grind really meant, with the Spurs getting an up-close demonstration. The Memphis Grizzlies would go on to upset the Spurs in 6 games because of this. And Jefferson would end up averaging 6.5 points, 4.2 rebounds, and 0.8 assists this series. Now Richard Jefferson would start the next season with the San Antonio Spurs, playing his similar role he had the prior 2 seasons. But the Spurs would decide to end up trading him mid-season, and he would be traded by the Spurs with TJ Ford and a 2012 first-round pick that would later go on to be Festus Ezeli to the Golden State Warriors for Steven Jackson, with the Spurs specifically wanting Jackson back based off the prior success they have had with him. Now Jefferson would be joining a Warriors team led by David Lee and Monte Ellis, but had a young core forming in Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson. The Warriors were in the early days though and would finish the season going 23-43, missing the playoffs. Jefferson would average 9.2 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 1.4 assists this season between the Spurs and the Warriors. The next season would see the Golden State Warriors blossom because of several great offseason moves to start the season. They would end up drafting 2 high-caliber players in Harrison Barnes and Draymond Green in the draft. Now on top of this, they would trade Monte Ellis for Andrew Bogut, freeing up the team to be Stephen Curry's team while getting rim protection in return. With all the impressive moves, the Warriors would improve to go 47-35, getting a 6th seed, making it back to the playoffs. However, despite team improvement, Richard Jefferson was appearing to regress with age and finding himself injured at times, also out of rotation as well. He would end up averaging 3.1 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 0.6 assists this season in 56 games. In round 1, the Warriors would face the Denver Nuggets, who were led by Ty Lawson, Andre Iguodala, and Danilo Gallinari. However, Danilo Gallinari would be out with an injury, and his impact would be truly missed as the Warriors would go on to beat the Nuggets in 6 games. Now in the second round, the Golden State Warriors would be facing the team who traded Jefferson away in the San Antonio Spurs. Now in this series, the youth of the Warriors would show versus the veteran-led Spurs. Despite making great strides this year, the Warriors would get another learning lesson with the Spurs beating them in 6 games. Now, Richard Jefferson, this playoffs run, would only play up in 6 games this postseason, averaging 1.9 points and 1 rebound. In the offseason, Richard Jefferson would be traded as a trade chip in a blockbuster deal. Now, hold your breath as I break down this entire 3-team trade. Now, as a part of the 3-team trade, Richard Jefferson was traded by the Golden State Warriors with Andres Biedrins, Brandon Rush, and a 2014 first-round pick that would later go on to be Rodney Hood, and a 2016 second-round pick that would go on to be Tyrone Wallace, and a 2017 first-round pick that would go on to be Josh Hart, and a 2017 second-round pick that would go on to be Alpha Kaba to the Utah Jazz. Now, the Denver Nuggets would trade Andre Iguodala to the Golden State Warriors, and the Denver Nuggets traded cash in a 2018 second-round draft pick that would go on to be Sviatoslav Mikhailu to the Utah Jazz. Now, the Golden State Warriors would trade another 2018 second-round pick that would go on to be Thomas Wells to the Denver Nuggets. Now, the Utah Jazz traded Randy Foye to the Denver Nuggets, and the Utah Jazz also traded Kevin Murphy to the Golden State Warriors, thus ending the trade. In result, Utah had Richard Jefferson, and he would find himself joining a young and struggling Jazz team led by Gordon Hayward. And Richard Jefferson would see himself become a starter yet again, where he would average 10.1 points, 2.7 rebounds, and 1.6 assists on a Utah Jazz team that would end up missing the playoffs this season. In the offseason, Richard Jefferson was a free agent and would ultimately end up deciding to sign a contract with the Dallas Mavericks to play a bench role backing up Chandler Parsons for a playoff caliber team. Now, the Dallas Mavericks this season would be led by an aging Dirk Nowitzki and Monte Ellis. Richard Jefferson would see his averages decrease from the year prior in a smaller role to 5.8 points a night, 2.5 rebounds, and 0.8 assists, helping the Mavericks go 50-32, getting a 7 seed in the West. They would also get a matchup in round 1 against the Houston Rockets, who were led by Dwight Howard and James Harden. Now, the Mavericks would struggle to match up against the Rockets, though, having Harden have his way with the Mavericks on top of Chandler Parsons only being able to go one game in this entire series, resulting in a gentleman's sweep of the Mavericks. Richard Jefferson this series would average 3.8 points and 0.5 rebounds. In the offseason, Richard Jefferson was a free agent again, and being the age of 35, he decided it was time to ring chase, and he would join the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were led by LeBron James, Kevin Love, and Kyrie Irving. Richard Jefferson would go on to play a similar role as he did in Dallas the year prior, which would see him average 5.5 points, 1.7 rebounds, and 0.8 assists off the bench, helping the Cavaliers go 57-25, getting the number 1 seed in the East. Now, the Cavaliers would go on to cruise through their first 2 rounds in the playoffs with sweeps over the Detroit Pistons and Atlanta Hawks, making it into the Eastern Conference Finals. There, the Cavaliers would meet the Toronto Raptors, who would provide more of a challenge than what the East had so far. DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry would play well, but it ultimately wouldn't be enough to stop LeBron James on his charge to get Cleveland a championship, with the Cavs winning in 6 games, only growing the LeBronto legacy. Now, in the finals, the Cavs would meet up against Richard Jefferson's former team in the Golden State Warriors, who were led by Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, where it would prove to be a lopsided to start, with the Warriors going up 3-1 in the series. Yet the Cavs wouldn't quit, where they would rally and force a Game 7. Now, in Game 7 would be a back and forth, but the Cavs would ultimately prevail late to a big block from LeBron on Iguodala, who was traded for Jefferson, as well as a big shot from Kyrie Irving late in the game, helping the Cavaliers become the first team to win the title while trailing 3-1 in the series. Richard Jefferson, after all these years, was on top and an NBA champion. Over the championship run, Jefferson would average 5.4 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 0.7 assists a night, playing a key role player in the Cavs' success. Now, Jefferson would rejoin the Cavs after flirting with retirement in the offseason for a chance to repeat. Jefferson would maintain similar numbers to the prior year, going with 5.7 points, 2.6 rebounds, and 1 assist, seeing the Cavs go 51-31, getting a 2 seed in the playoffs, where in the first 2 rounds again they would not drop a single game, sweeping both the Indiana Pacers and the Toronto Raptors. And in the Eastern Conference Finals, the Cavaliers would get a matchup against the Boston Celtics team led by Al Horford and Isaiah Thomas. However, Thomas would only play in 2 games, picking up an injury, helping the Cavaliers advance rather easily in 5 games, getting a finals matchup against none other than the Golden State Warriors again. But after last year's defeat to the Cavaliers, the Warriors had added Kevin Durant in the offseason, which would prove to be one too many of talented players for the Cavaliers to handle, with the Warriors winning the NBA championship in 5 games. Richard Jefferson, along this run back to the NBA Finals, would average 3.9 points, 1.8 rebounds, and 0.5 assists. Richard Jefferson would end up being traded right before the start of next season to clear up space, and he would be traded by the Cleveland Cavaliers with Kay Felder, $3 million in cash, and a 2019 second-round pick that would go on to be Eric Paschall to the Atlanta Hawks for 2 foreign overseas players who haven't played in the NBA, and was shortly waived after by the Atlanta Hawks. Now he would, after this, end up signing a 1-year deal with the Denver Nuggets, where Richard Jefferson would be joining a young and forming core on a Nuggets team around Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. However, Richard would find himself barely playing, and Richard Jefferson would only end up playing in 20 games this season, averaging 1.5 points, 0.9 rebounds, and 0.8 assists. Now, the Denver Nuggets would make a push for the playoffs, but would ultimately fall up just short, going 46-36, finishing 9th. After the season ended, Richard Jefferson decided it was time to hang them up, and over his 17-year career, he would average 12.6 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. After retiring, Richard Jefferson would go on to work as a TV basketball analyst for the Nets games and as well as ESPN, and even gave refereeing a try in the NBA Summer League. Now, Richard Jefferson will go down as an elite athlete who always knew the right time to cut to the basket, providing good defense and knocking down an open shot, helping see himself become a part of multiple winning teams from college to the pros and even winning a ring in Cleveland. Richard Jefferson will be remembered as a quirky character that knew how to play ball at a high level above all else. Thanks for watching this video on Richard Jefferson's career. Now, if you would like to see any videos in the future on any random player, please suggest them in the comments below and I may or may not decide to do a video on them. In the meantime, have a good one and thanks again for watching. This has been Skid Denver.